You're listening to 106.9 Tune FM here on the home of UNE's student-powered radio. And today, to celebrate World Literacy Day, which is the 8th of September, I have in the studio Dr. Nathan Lowien from UNE to talk all things literature and literacy and a few other interesting tidbits as part of his research. So thank you so much for joining me in the studio today, Nathan.
Yeah, it's great to be here as well. So thank you.
I'm very excited to get into it. I'm a big literature fan, and I know literacy is slightly different to literature, but they are very intertwined. But to get started, for our listeners who don't know you, um, who are you and what do you do at UNE?
I'm a senior lecturer in English language and literacy education in the School of Education at UNE. I have a deep interest in language, multimodal literature and literacy. And before becoming a lecturer, I was a teacher for 10 years within Queensland and also in the ACT.
So that's very exciting. So what brought you from? I suppose you do sort of still teach in a way, just at a different level. What brought you from teaching in? I'm not sure. Was it primary or secondary?
Primary education. And what brought me to, or to set me on the path to become an academic is my growing knowledge of language and my interest in language and grammar and how that can really be used to support students' development of their own grammar to express themselves, but also their literacy skills as well.
And, literacy is something that is talked about so often in the media. And I think people like to use it as a bit of a scare tactic these days with, everyone's on social media, everyone's losing this, they can't read. But from your experience as someone who has been a teacher at a primary level and has now since moved into an academic space looking at these same things, how have you seen literacy rates evolve?
So for me, literacy and language are essential and they're really tied together. And there's a famous quote by Paul Ferreri who describes literacy as reading the world as well as reading the word. So what this kind of means is that language and literacy give us a vehicle to investigate and learn about our world, our culture, and our communities, and really making good, solid connections to our background and prior knowledge. But it also gives us the language and literacy skills to explain our position within the world, what's important to us, what we value, where we live, our cultures and our communities and our identities. We can explain through language and literacy as well. So it's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people miss about literacy is they think of it just in terms of, okay, this person can read this chapter and then write about it, but it is also a matter of engaging, as you're saying here. But I think there's also that element of struggle for a lot of people, particularly if they have a learning disorder or something like dyslexia, where literacy becomes very, very hard for them. So, what are some of the different ways that we can look at improving literacy in people who struggle with a more traditional or conventional method?
Method as well. So there's a range of teaching approaches that educators use to support students in their own literacy and reading and writing and speaking development as well. Some of these approaches you might have heard of as being concentrating on phonics and building up students' knowledge of particular sounds and their associated letter patterns. Other approaches might focus around comprehension and meaning making skills and getting students to connect their meaning or their comprehension to their prior knowledge and their knowledge of the world. And then there's other approaches that will look at getting students to really evaluate what they're reading, getting them to identify the ideas or values represented in a text and considering, well, how does that value sit with what I value? How do those ideas describe me or position me within in the world? So those approaches really produce students' agency to be able to respond to the world as well. And then there's even further approaches that will look at building up students' language, grammar knowledge, and knowledge of, I guess, how to use language in particular social settings or to express ideas and enact personal roles or relationships as well. So I think with all these various approaches, educators have a lot of deep professional knowledge, which they can identify which approach might be better to use for the particular students in their classroom as well. So they can definitely identify those needs that students may have in particular areas of reading, writing, and speaking, and then use the best and appropriate method to support that student's needs as well.
I imagine that that's a skill that comes with time. I think, people aren't often sure at how to even identify some of these issues if a student's having them to start with. Nathan, I'm wondering as well, this isn't one that I sent you ahead of time, so I apologize
Yeah,
for this,
it's
but
okay.
how does representation play a role in specifically young children, people who are just starting to read, or other groups? How does that representation play a role in engaging them in literacy? An example that I've seen that might maybe help you was someone that I work with talking about how very, very few children's books actually contain images or stories of people with disabilities.
Yes. So this is actually a really quite interesting area that you've raised there as well. The representation of characters within text as well. And I think what you're identifying and pointing to there as well is that picture books contain more than just language or words. They often contain accompanying images, and those images can represent, say, a character's capacity or their ability as well. Um, and it's important then to really get students not only to be able to read the written language in picture books, but also for them to inspect and read the visual images. And once again, consider how does that reflect me as a reader? How does the language and the image work together to communicate the whole total message of the book? And once students start to critically appreciate how those language and images operate within a text, they're able to really respond uh, to the text and therefore start to have a bit of a critical appreciation, perhaps that a character hasn't been represented as well as the other students, perhaps in their class, or represented like the other students in their class or the world around them as well.
And so, does it help students from that background to become more engaged with gaining literacy if they see themselves represented?
I think absolutely, because if you can see yourself represented in a text, or you can identify that perhaps the text hasn't represented members of the community that surround you, you're making that significant link to your own personal knowledge and your own personal background. And that's been shown to have quite significant impact into reading and comprehension, making those strong links to your own prior knowledge. So absolutely fundamental.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Nathan, and I know is an area of research for you in an academic sense, is this idea of multimodal theory. Um, I read your bio and I feel like I kind of have an understanding of it, but what actually is multimodal theory in like the study of literacy?
So, multimodal theory is quite an exciting area as well, and it really looks at the interaction between in print or digital texts and how language, image, perhaps a character's gestures, the accompanying sound within a multimodal text, and how do all those meaning systems work together to communicate a message of a text as well. So my research has particularly focused in on how language and image operate within picture books, animated films, or video games as well. So I tend to use the Australian curriculum English resources and the grammar resources within the Australian curriculum English, and I work with teachers and students to build up their knowledge of those language grammar resources, but also the accompanying visual grammar resources within the curriculum, and have students and teachers investigate how those different modes of meaning work together to express and communicate meaning within multimodal texts as well.
Yeah, it sounds so some coming from someone with a background in journalism and communications. It's really interesting to me to hear this discussion of image and language working together to shape meaning, because that's one of the things that we're taught very early on in communications is that communicating is the shared creation of meaning or understanding, and so it's just I think it's really beautiful to see it come across all these different ways how at the core of it understanding if you understand what's being communicated, that person has communicated effectively, and image works really well with that. You know, the thing you were saying about video games, I imagine most people out there are probably picturing like I don't know, Assassin's Creed or FIFA or something very much. But is it that sort of video game, or is it video games that are designed with the needs of children to learn literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I've looked at both types of video games with my research. I've looked at spelling video games within that are often used in early primary school and in primary school. And I examined the game to see whether the spelling game was actually rewarding and supporting students to play the video game and teaching them their knowledge of spelling, or was it rewarding their gameplay within in the game as well? So that was quite an interesting study. And then in a high school setting, I've also worked with Year 10 teachers across 2 Year 10 classrooms to develop a sequence of learning, a unit of work that involved students looking at Batman Arkham Asylum, an action adventure video game that was popular a while ago. But the students in that unit of work were investigating how values were represented within the text. And one of the interesting aspects that the students started to identify is that in Arkham Asylum, they noticed that there was a difference in power relations between the way the prisoners or the mentally sick patients in the asylum were treated and the medical staff. So they were able to critically respond and reinterpret the video game in front of a green screen. We got them to reenact the game in front of a green screen, and those students were really proactive and wanting to change the power relationships between the patients and the doctors to make them more equal. So they chose to use more eye level camera angles to kind of make a more balanced power relationship. So they did that through a number of images that they took, and also changing particular words and grammar features within the dialogue that they used as well. So it was really quite
Yeah.
inspiring for the students to see that, but also be empowered uh, from learning about those image grammar resources, but also the language grammar resources, and being able to demonstrate their learning and purposeful use of those resources
And
in
that's
their
so
assessment
interesting.
tasks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be, it's one of those things that engages students as well. You're meeting them where they're at, you're using their interest to teach them. I wanted to go back, Nathan, because you're talking about literacy in the sense that I imagine makes a lot of sense to you in terms of what I might refer to as a media literacy, being able to understand and identify those underlying themes. Um, I'm curious because I think a lot of people who maybe don't have a more academic understanding of it would think of literacy just as being able to read or being able to write or just having that literate ability. So what is the difference between being literate and having literacy?
Being literate and having literacy. That is quite a large question and quite a meaningful question. For me, literacy and being literate is being able to use grammar resources and use language in particular and purposeful social contexts. So what do I mean by that? I mean, for students in primary school, if they were talking to their friends out in the playground, they would be using particular types of language and grammar resources that represent a friendly, affiliated relationship with their friends. However, if they would most likely change their language choices and the words that they use if they were talking to the school principal or a teacher as well. So we tend to change the way we use language in particular social contexts to achieve a purpose. And I think that's what literacy is as well. Being able to make purposeful choices to communicate your own meaning as well.
I love that definition and that sort of, yeah, very, very different way of looking at it, because I think it adds a lot to what we mean when we say literacy. Someone might actually have a lot of literacy when it comes to watching animated films or playing video games and being able to do exactly what you have described, identify those themes, and with the example with the students in Batman Arkham Asylum, be able to translate that. But they might struggle when it comes to something more like, reading something very dense like Jane Austen, for example,
That's
because there's a whole extra layer of complexity there. Um,
that's right.
and I just find that really, really fascinating. It's an area that I'm very interested in myself. And the use of video games and film to help teach literacy, you know, how how are we seeing this being implemented more as technology evolves?
As technology evolves. I think this is a really essential question as well. Ever for the past 25 years, our digital communication technologies have really increased so much that there's now understanding that we're living really in a post-digital society where we're really saturated by digital communications, by texts that use multiple forms of meaning as well. We're at a really interesting point where we can use some older technology or newer technology really for particular purposes as well. And there's a great photo of someone in New York in Central Park sitting with a typewriter on his lap in a park with a manual typewriter typing out in the park. So it's followed by a caption of saying, "You're not a true hipster without taking your typewriter to the park." And I think this is such a reflection of where we are at the moment in our society with digital communication. It turns out when the person was asked why he brought a typewriter to the park, and he responded, "Well, I'm writing poetry to give to people who are passing by, but my handwriting's actually quite messy, so it's actually easier to type it out on a typewriter." To hand it out to people. And I think that's just a really great example of we can really choose the right type of technology for our right purpose as well. Um, and that informing students and building their awareness of that and how technology has changed over time. Um, but it comes back to that same purpose of how can we use it best to communicate in our current world as well. And that's something that the Australian Curriculum English and the New South Wales syllabus also start to explore through the use of multimodal texts. And the Australian curriculum has a particular substrand that really looks at visual language and visual communication, which contains a number of visual grammar resources as well. So
And
it
so
is.
these different methods, they're becoming used more commonly in schools.
They're becoming more common within curriculum documents, and teachers are very much aware that, for example, picture books, that the visual images will convey meaning that's not necessarily mentioned in the written text as well. So teachers do have this knowledge as well. So there is a growing body of work out there regarding this as well, but it's still evolving and it's still growing.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's, something that I think about quite often when I'm in lectures or seminars is there's always a visual component. There's a PowerPoint. There is a visual component in tertiary education with having those images that if I reflect on my high school education, there was a lot of words written on a whiteboard, but there
Yes.
wasn't a lot of a visual component to what was being taught, unless we had a book, for example, or a worksheet in front of us that might have extra images, usually in relation to learning another language.
Yeah.
Um, so, like Chinese, for example, all of our worksheets had images related to what we were talking about, but our English worksheets didn't, because it was just assumed that we would understand what was already on the page. So I think it's an
Mm.
interesting comparison,
Th-
just from my own brain and experiences based on what you're saying.
Yes, yes. That's right, and it's that I think sometimes when we're learning our first language, there in the classroom there is a lot of assumed prior knowledge as well, but teachers are able to once again identify the needs of the students in their class, and once again use their professional judgments and knowledge to be able to use that right method to support the students learning around that. Um, it's interesting, your description of the classroom as well. There's been some recent research into visual grammar around infographics, often used in science. And often in science, students are required to draft visual images and diagrams to support and demonstrate their understanding of particular scientific concepts as well. So, we've throughout education, we've often used kind of images to support learning in different ways, but multimodal theory and multimodal literacy theory gives us a way to really inspect and investigate that further and see how we can support students learning even further.
Yeah, it sounds like a deeply fascinating, interesting theory to get into, and it sounds like it's an area of research that's sort of still being developed, which I think is a great opportunity for any of our students out there who are listening, who are going into education, who might think this is something that I could, do a bit more work on. Nathan, I would be remiss though if I didn't throw you a question about AI because it's such a massive topic at the moment. How have you seen, or how do you think AI is affecting literacy at the moment?
Um, this is another interesting question, and generative AI is quite an evolving space as well. One of the aspects that I've written about and have been interested in with Gen AI is often we can put in a prompt that generates a lot of texts. But what I'm really, as a researcher, what I'm interested in is the information that people include in their prompt, because that's the information of their social world, their social context. They're describing what they want, or the knowledge that they want generated, whether it's a letter, whether it's a description of a scientific concept. So they enter the knowledge that they want, but they will also have to describe, well, what context is it? Is it a formal context? Is it an informal context that I want this generated for? Do I want it for a written script or a verbal script, or do I want it to sound more academic, like more abstract, like written languages as well? So I think it's those literacy choices that describe the context of the prompt that is going into Gen AI that I'm mostly interested in, and because then that kind of dictates the language that you're going to generate as well, and how you use that in your own social purpose and context. I was also involved with working with teachers as to how they could use generative AI prompts and use that in the classroom to support learning as well. And some interesting things came out of that discussion of activities such as the generative AI prompt was placed in. Students would then read through the text that was generated and then have discussions of how they could actually change it to make it better and bump it up as well to suit their context more appropriately as well. So it was quite an interesting conversation and article that we wrote with that as well.
I'd be very interested to read it myself personally. I see a lot of people use AI for a lot of different things, and I know it's becoming a bit of a problem in the assessment space, for students and regardless of what level they're at. So it's very interesting to me looking at it from a place of how this impacts a person's understanding if they're getting AI to do things for them, but then also how their own understanding of the subject matter that they're feeding into the AI then influences what the AI is giving back. So it's just such a fascinating and very almost scary space, I think, for me as someone who does a lot with meeting and
Right.
communication. It sets my teeth on edge a little bit, but I think it's you've said that there is definitely potential there, which I think is really interesting from an academic space of how do we use it in a ethical manner.
That's yeah. And that's one of the other things the teachers said in the discussion as well is prompting, putting in a place for the text to be used ethically and prompting it proactively, prompting that ethical position that you wanted the text to reflect as well. So it was interesting to hear you say that as well. So
Yeah. There's
yeah,
so much overlap between the two sort of disciplines almost. Thank
yes.
you so much, Nathan. Just before we wrap up, is there anything that I haven't asked, that we haven't covered, or that I might not have followed up on that you think is really important or interesting for listeners to know or hear about?
Education is such an exciting place, and multimodal theory and literacy learning is a growing space that has a lot of potential to really engage and support students' learning throughout the next quarter of this 21st century. So, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on today, Nathan. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'm really delighted in the discussion that we've had and learning more about multimodal theory and the ways in which all these different things come together to help with literacy and its different applications. So thank you for this wonderful discussion with me today.
Yeah, thank you.